Hello and welcome to our panel on Turkey-EU relations in the aftermath of the July the 15th coup attempt. Now we're going to be talking about a very pertinent topic today. It is very pertinent because both the European Union and Turkey have been going through a very turbulent time in terms of their both domestic policies and foreign policies. And today we're going to have a panel of very distinguished speakers to talk about their views on the current relationship and perhaps the prospects for a future relationship in the light of these developments, both regional and also global. Now we're going to be starting with on my left-hand side with Mr. Ruprecht Polenz, who is the former member of the German Bundestag, and who was also the Mercator IPC Senior Fellow in 2014 and 15. He is also a member of International Advisory Council of the IPC Sabancı University and the Stiftung Mercator Initiative. And his points of work are on foreign and security policy with a regional emphasis on the Middle East, in particular on Iran and Turkey and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If I could ask each speaker to talk for about 10 to 15 minutes maximum, so that we're going to have enough time for questions and answers with the audience. Thank you. Mr. Polenz, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction and for inviting me to this panel. Some 4 or 5 years ago, I wrote a little book, and the title was "Better for the Two of Them, Turkey Should Become a Member of the European Union." And I must admit, I still think this should be the goal. But of course, things had happened in between. And to be honest, if I would discuss about this headline with a German audience, most of them would think I'm crazy. I would be crazy. Because, and this people in Turkey should know, and maybe you know, the perception of the present Turkey in Germany is not as good as it has been, let's say, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And as a person who is very much still, let's say, gripped with the goal to bring Turkey and Europe closer together, because I think it is of strategic importance for Turkey not to be doomed to be, let's say, amidst those states in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Iran, and so on, without any backing of the European Union, or relying more on Russia. This would not be a good path for the future for Turkey, and on the other hand, also for Europe. If you want to have some kind of influence in the Middle East, which is very important for Germany as well, together with Turkey, it's much easier to do it than without Turkey. And I understood, and I was also a bit sad about that after the coup, there were no really firm and immediate signs of solidarity from Germany or also from the European Union side. And I understand the disappointment with that. But on the other hand, right now, there is a concern that the reaction of the government vis-à-vis the coup causes big problems. Because just yesterday I read in a German newspaper that so many teachers are kicked out of schools just because some of them had a bank account with a bank which is related to the Gülen organization. Gülen organization, yes. Gülen organization. Or we see that so many journalists are kicked out of office, newspapers are closed, and this creates concern because we thought the Turkey-EU negotiations with regard to membership, chapter by chapter, should bring Turkey more and more and closer to European law standards. And now we see a backlash, as we see it in Germany and in Europe. And I must admit, I see it too. I think it is very important that we have more transparency about the countermeasures against the coup. More transparency with the Turkish judiciary. You cannot just because you think somebody is guilty, treat him as guilty. You have to have a regular trial, a tribunal in a court. And otherwise, we have a principle in dubio pro reo, in the doubt for those people who are accused. And having said this, I really do hope that maybe the Turkish government will allow some observers from the European Union, from Germany, to look after these kind of processes which are now underway. And this could lead to a bit more transparency and maybe also to a better judgment what's going on after the coup. And my final remark, we are also, of course, very concerned about the increased military violence in southeast Anatolia. We know that it is not only not the fault of the government, but we had the hope that the peace negotiations between Kurds and the Turkish government would be more successful, and unfortunately they failed. So put all these developments together, then you get the maybe an idea how the Turkey-EU relationship is discussed at the very moment, for instance, in Germany. On the other hand, and here I would like to thank Turkey for what they have done and what they are doing with regard to the Syrian refugees. It was not so very well known in Germany that Turkey had for quite a while more than 2 million Syrian refugees in its country. And you know, and you might follow our discussions in Germany after we had now some 890,000, 900,000 refugees last year, this year. And then we had this EU-Turkey agreement on refugees, which I think is a very good step forward to handle these migration refugee crises. And the idea is that we hopefully can get to similar agreements between the European Union and other states like Tunisia, Morocco, to be a bit better in the management of these refugee crises. So there's a lot we still have to do in common, but to be able to act in common, we must, let's say, overcome the present perceptions, misperceptions maybe also, because otherwise all those who are really interested and engaged in Turkish-EU, Turkish-German relationship have the first hour to apologize for what they are doing instead of being applauded that they are working on a precious task. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pollens. I think you have mentioned a few important points, and I think perhaps one of those that we could draw on is the importance of the rule of law, the primacy of the rule of law and transparency in the struggle against the coup plotters, and perhaps following on from that, the importance of communication to the outside world, and in particular to the EU partners, how this is being done, and the primacy of the rule of law and the importance of it in doing this. And now I'd like to turn to our second distinguished speaker, who is Professor Nilüfer Göle, who is a professor of sociology at École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, sorry for my French, and the 2014 and 15 Mercator IPC Senior Fellow. She's also a member of the International Advisory Council of the IPC Sabancı University Stiftung Mercator Initiative. And as I'm sure most of you know, that her research themes focus on Islam, the public sphere, gender, secularism, and multiple modernities. So Professor Göle, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. I'll seize this opportunity to reflect upon maybe some of the analysis that we have been developing for the last 20 years, not in the post-July 15 era, but post-80, I would say, because I would like to question, first of all, in which sense this is a date, a turning point. Because when you say post-July 15, that means there's a really important turning point. There's a before and after, and we need to readapt our analysis, maybe if necessary, to change it. In relation to what? In relation to the ways we were defining the main stakes of Turkish democracy on the one hand, and Turkey-EU relations on the second. This is our topic. So I would say our frame of analysis, at least people like us, most of the time, our analysis was marked by post-1980 period in Turkey, post-80 coup in Turkey. This was the period, to make it very short, Özal liberalism, open society, Turkey being open to global society, and also consensus building. It was very important after a very important decade of right and left polarization and on a daily basis confrontations, violence attacks between far right and far left. This was a period, the political culture was marked by the word of consensus, how to build consensus between different political views and actors. And thirdly, Turkish candidacy for the ascension to European Union. So these three things I think is very important to remember. The period of 1980, open society, consensus building, and Turkish membership for European Union. From our perspective, social scientists, and I'm speaking of myself, one of the main stakes of Turkish democracy was to shift from authoritarian laïcité, the French notion of laïcité, imposed secularism from above, to inclusive secularism. Okay, so majority of my writings were oriented towards this hypothesis that we have to go towards inclusive secularism. Inclusive secularism meaning basically to go beyond the vicious circle between, in the Turkish case, democratization, which would be followed by Islamization, and then which would be stopped by a military coup. This is the vicious circle that we identified as the roots of Turkish authoritarianism. And to get rid of this vicious circle, the need for coming to terms with Islam, so therefore giving way within the parliamentary democracy to a legitimate political party. Of course, the Turkish political system didn't start in the post-80, but already the heritage of Erbakan since 70s made it possible for us that in the Turkish case, in counter-distinction with the Iranian revolution, again during the same dates, rather a revolution, in the Turkish case, the inclusion of the claims of religious claims within the parliamentary system would be possible because there is a rich political parliamentary heritage. So this was my way of seeing. And secondly, again, for the stakes of democracy, I would say to synchronize with the European political culture. So majority of the intellectuals like me who shared that point of view, rather than radical secularism, inclusive secularism, let's put it that way, and also pro-European in the sense that we thought engaging legal and institutional reforms in harmony, I'm taking the language of that moment, with Copenhagen criteria, would help to enhance, consolidate democracy. And this is very important, and this is the Europeanization in the sense of the political culture, in distinction from the American one. One thing is very important, of course, the evolution of death penalty. You're welcome. The evolution of death penalty was a very important moment in the Turkish reforms of democratization during that period, although it was considered as something superficial, something cosmetics from the point of view of European powers. I think they haven't understood even at that moment, the reforms that were engaged in the Turkish society with mobilization of the intellectuals, but also political leadership, and to make these reforms. They were considered, at least, I don't know, in the German case, word to word, but in French public sphere it was discussed as cosmetic reforms, göz boyama, and to influence us. So I would say at that, from a more macro level perspective, Turkey was seen almost as a role model for that period, during these periods. In which sense a role model? Not in the sense that the Turkish case can be replicable everywhere and in the same way, but in the sense that there can be an inclusive secularism which will make it possible for Islam to be part of the parliamentary system. I think this in the sense that something which is thought to be antinomic, that is a Muslim majority country and democracy, it can be possible. I think this was the hypothesis that on which we were building our analysis, but also all democratic forces were trying to make this possible. In a sense, we can say there was a kind of success achievement. In which sense? Again, I make it very bold. For the last 2 decades, from post-80s onwards, we have seen the transformation of Islam, seen from, again, macro perspective, from the world's perspective, where everywhere Islamic movements are, therefore, getting on the agenda. You have revolutionary Islam in Iran, and you have other kinds of movements. In the Turkish case, we have seen a transformation of political Islam in the sense through AKP formation and coming to power, and with market economy and also turning the Islamist movement into a legitimate political party. This is the first achievement. And the second Islam that we were seeing during that period coming more and more to the surface was, Gülen movement, we can call it almost enlightened, quote unquote, Islam, in the sense that it gave much more emphasis to education, formation of elites, elite Islam, and but coming from poor social classes through education, therefore becoming more included into the society, pious confrérie, and much more into interfaith dialogue, media and journalism, the public face. So a kind of pious movement, but which is becoming a kind of alternative, you can say, to terrorist Islam of ISIS. So in a way, in Turkey we had these 2 transformations of contemporary Islam, one in the political parliamentary system, the other one in the more educative system at a global scale, which could have been, and it was referred by the people of Arab Spring and others, as a model that really can go beyond the things that we see. 15th of June put an end to that. So that there is a period, 15th of June, there is a before and after, because we do not speak of Turkey easily as a model that can be successful. But we have, on the contrary, some questions. So first of all, our paradigm, the social scientific paradigm that I can name as post-secular, taking it also from Habermas, but all the work I have done and others, saying that we have to include Islam and not speak about only the hegemony of a secular state. In a way, I wouldn't say it failed, but it had some unexpected consequences. So we have to take this into account, a kind of reflexivity. We are no longer in the post-secular paradigm, saying inclusive secularism would be the answer to more democratic, to define more democracy in Turkey. Why? Because we have seen clash between not the religious and the secular, but between 2 Islams in 15th of July coming. So there has been a clash between two Islams, and not like many people who were saying the clash between Islams is between Shiite and Sunnite Islam, but two majority Sunnite movements who started as an ally, who turned against one each other. And of course, we have seen another face of the Gülen movement, which a failed coup has shown to us another face, which is not that civil societal and pious, but also eager to take state power. So one of the blind spots of Turkish democracy came to surface, which is the most important thing. This is the relationship to state power. That is the struggle for state power, and none of these actors have been thinking about putting a distance between themselves and the state power. So this is one thing very important. It's Claude Lefort, the French philosopher and political scientist, who were saying that the idea of democracy is a disincorporation of the political, that is, creation of a space, empty space, where nobody can claim for power. So we are still living of struggle for claim of power. And one of the stakes of democracy today is to create an empty space, that is autonomy of the state institutions in relation to political power, judiciary, army, and the police, but also, I would add, the public sphere. Because in all democracies, more and more, the public sphere and individuals, persons, intellectuals, and researchers, citizens are endangered. They feel vulnerable in the public space. That's, you can call freedom of expression as well. So therefore, rule of law is this autonomy of these state institutions. So I would come back, so therefore, no, I go quickly, okay? If I come to now to European, the second frame of analysis, that is European Union-Turkey relations. The first one, therefore, inclusive secularism, the cleavages that we have mentioned is no longer valid. We have to come up with a new frame. Maybe this is self-criticism, and we had unintended, unexpected consequences of our analysis. So these events show that we need to change our political framework, our analysis, the paradigm. Second one is in relation to Europe and Turkey relations. And there again, we thought we had to have to harmonize with the political culture of the European countries. And again, here now there's a big change in Europe. I don't think we should speak about harmonization of our culture, political culture with Europe, because what we see, we need to change our frame in our reading of European countries, what you know as neo-populist movements, which has changed in relation to Muslim presence in Europe, the political culture. It is becoming much more related with securitization, security politics, but also politics of fear, closing down the frontiers, not only the real frontiers, but also in the public sphere, all religious signs that have been debated since the post-1980 period in France, in Germany, in Italy, in many countries, the religious signs being both the veiling, the covering of Islamic women, Muslim women, but also minaret debate in Switzerland, and now very lately the burkini debate in the, as you know, in the beaches, on the beaches. And they are really important issues. It's not only excluding people, but banning them, and with a new law. So therefore, the public sphere will be excluded and cleaned up from Muslim presence. So I think the European culture is getting towards something that we don't want to get harmonized with. I mean, we have to be critical also with the European political culture. What happens, I would say, the cleavage today, there is this new definition, both in Turkey and in Europe, of nativist populism. That's how I would propose. This is just, I mean, some ideas to share with you. It is not a very long-term thinking, but still, I think what we have to see is a nativist populism, is both in both cases. That is, who makes part of the national community, indigenous, however how we are going to define, And who are the strangers? And second characteristic of this culture is majoritarian democracy, both in Turkey and in European countries. How the majoritarian values should prevail and citizens should be in conformity with it. Here again, we have really convergence in the sense that there are some tendencies that go in the sense of maybe undermining democracy in the sense we understand, but the tendencies are very similar, both in Europe and in Turkey. So, nativist populism, I say it again, majoritarian democracy, and meaning that citizens should be in conformity with majority values. We have seen this in all the debates around around controversies in relation to Islam. France and Germany, very different countries in relation to the place of religion in public life. They are more and more converging in the way they want to redefine secularism. In a way, we are not yet in France in post-secular paradigm. And Germany, although there is this post-secular paradigm developed by Habermas, I don't think, politically speaking, they are in post-secular paradigm. But still, in both cases, this nativism is becoming very important in the definition of, I wouldn't say it's not nationalism, but nativism, against maybe global connections, against some kind of cosmopolitics, I would say. It is, again, to quote from a German thinker, Wolf Lepenis, no, the first one was French, sorry. Wolf Lepenis, he would say democracy is a learning process. It's mutual learning from each other. So our second frame that has to be changed, instead of thinking that we have to adapt ourselves, Turkey, to the European political culture, I think we have to come up with ways of collaboration that can really create new ways of maybe understanding the public culture and democracy. I would say, again, for that, open democracy, open society is becoming very important, rather than closing down of the public sphere in many places. And secondly, this is some of the agendas of the IPC and Mercator collaboration, how to face some challenges, global challenges together. So one is this definition of democracy, how to go beyond native populism. And the thematic of collaboration is climate issues, but there is also, we know, refugees are becoming, again, very important for democracies. The issue of papers, those who are without papers, or double citizenship are becoming controversial issues in many democracies. And religious education in both countries is also one of the topics, I think, that will become more and more important, because young people, young Turkish-born Germans are coming to Turkey for having religious education in Diyanet and going back. So in real life, we are all connected. But in political realm, frontiers are drawn to separate. So I think I would see EU relations much more at the around the real issues that concern both countries, and both Turkey and Germany. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Gölle. I think your contribution was particularly significant, both for its conceptual aspect and for also regarding its policy-wide aspect as well. Because conceptually, I think it opens up a debate about the connection between and the relationship between democracy and secularism, inclusive secularism, as you've mentioned, but also the relationship between democracy and struggle for state power, which are issues and themes that have been, of course, explored conceptually in the literature, but which become very pertinent under the new conditions in both in between Europe and Turkey. And also, I think it's very important in showing that, the relationship between the European Union, yes, enlargement and accession is an important part of it, but it's not just about accession and enlargement, because it covers so many issue areas, including, some certain commonalities and parallels, like the rise of native neo-populism and politics of fear and majority and democracy, etc., both at the regional and the global level, but also about other issues like migration, like other issues like economic cooperation in the scope of increasing protectionism and etc. So these are all, I think, issues that we can further discuss. So thank you very much for that. Now our third speaker has also arrived, Mr. Gerald Knaus, who is the founding chairman of the European Stability Initiative, and he's also the 2016-17 Mercator IPC Senior Fellow. He currently focuses on issues such as Turkey's accession to the EU, visa liberalization, and the refugee issue in Europe and Turkey, but we also, of course, know him from his work on the Western Balkans as well, and the region at large. So, Gerald, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Well, it's a great pleasure to be here with so many friends on the panel and in the audience. And let me defer the answer to the obvious question to the end of my presentation, which is why I came late, because it's something to do with the topic that I want to talk about. I would like to begin by exploring the topic that we've come together to discuss, which is cooperation, space for cooperation between Turkey and Europe and Turkey and the EU, common interests and common values, by starting at a place rather far from here and then ending up in Turkey. The place I would like to start from is on the Austrian-Swiss border in April 1939. At that time, a Swiss border guard, or rather the police commander in the city of St. Gallen, western Switzerland, lost his job. His name was Paul Grüninger, and he was fired from his job in St. Gallen because the authorities had discovered that with his support, 3,600 Austrian Jews had been illegally allowed into Switzerland. He had picked them up, he had helped forge documents, he had helped circumvent the visa requirement which the Swiss authorities had imposed in April 1938, only 3 weeks after the, well, how shall I call it, voluntary annexation of Austria by Nazi Germany and the immediate, ferocious persecution of Austria's 200,000 strong Jewish community. Now, Grüninger was asked what he had done because he had broken the law, and he never denied that. And he just said, and he never regretted that until his death in the early 90s, when he died without a retirement, and in the early 70s, 1972, when he died without a retirement, and on the books as a convicted man, he'd always maintained that, well, what I'd done was just human. It's interesting because a few years later, with these experiences in mind, and in another Swiss border town in 1951, the Refugee Convention was agreed in Geneva. And at the core of the Refugee Convention was a very simple idea, Article 33, which says that what had been happening, not only in Switzerland, but also in Switzerland, which is that people, where everybody knew that if they would be sent back into danger, they might have a serious risk to their life and liberty, that this should not be allowed, that anybody's claim to protection should be assessed before they are being sent back. This is the core of the international regime of refugee protection. It's Article 33. It's the lesson, I would call it the Paul Grüninger principle. And what is so interesting is that the same year in which this Refugee Convention was agreed, 1951, a little girl was smuggled, stateless, without papers, across the very border in western Switzerland, from Austria, from the Austrian mountains to Switzerland. The border guards didn't actually check her papers. They let her in. In post-war Europe, the attitude was, well, there were so many stateless people you didn't check. And that little girl, stateless, without papers, smuggled into Switzerland, was my mother. And so in our family, I remember, I thought this was funny, that in the year in which there was a refugee convention, there was a little stateless girl born in Berlin of a Russian mother who somehow was smuggled into Switzerland, that these principles somehow are the framework within which we operate. Now I get to Turkey and the EU, because today it will take cooperation between Turkey and the EU to save those principles. In the last years, you all know it, we all know it, We are facing one of the biggest refugee catastrophes in the world. The largest number of refugees today are produced in Turkey's southern neighbor, Syria. 7 million internally displaced, at least inside the country, 7 million outside or more. And this has turned Syria's neighbors, Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, into the countries hosting most refugees in the world. A few years ago, in 2015, early in the year, I met some EU officials in Ankara at a private dinner. This was still largely seen as a Turkish problem, because people stayed in Turkey. But in the summer and then autumn of last year, it became what is known as the European refugee crisis. As an unprecedented number of people crossed from Turkey to Greece, through the Balkans, to Central Europe, to Austria, to Germany, and to Sweden largely. And in response to this, you had very different European policy reactions. You had a German reaction, which you saw the pictures. It wasn't just the politicians, it was also the publics, the football fans who had these banners 1 year ago in the stadium saying refugees are welcome, the people at train stations from Munich to Hamburg to Dortmund. But you also had a political reaction that was rather different in other parts of Europe, which actually accused the Germans of being too nice, accused their leaders, in particular Chancellor Merkel, of encouraging these Syrians to irresponsibly try to get to Europe, and which said that, well, faced with this crisis, what we should really do is rethink our international principles. Perhaps Article 33 and the Refugee Convention can't be maintained. Perhaps we should just give up on it. Perhaps we should return to a policy of pushbacks. Perhaps we should rescind the right that anybody who reaches Europe has the right to be assessed. Perhaps the Refugee Convention is outdated and can no longer be respected, because our publics will not support it. Well, we are today, at this moment, facing a huge debate across Europe whether the Refugee Convention can be saved. And in this debate, some in Europe, and particularly some in Germany and some in Turkey, will play the key role. And they might determine in the next few weeks or months whether, as 2017 begins and ends with a lot of key elections in many European countries, we will end up with a politics in Europe, and that would have, of course, demonstration value for the rest of the world, in which the Refugee Convention is abolished, or whether we can demonstrate that democratic majorities and their leaders are capable of both controlling borders and respecting refugee rights, of both showing solidarity while maintaining the trust of publics that the uncontrolled, chaotic, and often deadly crossing with smugglers across Europe's southern Mediterranean borders can be brought under control without building a fortress Europe. 6 months ago or so, the EU and Turkey reached an agreement. It's sometimes called a deal, which is a little bit disparaging. I call it an agreement. In reality, it's just a statement. It doesn't change any laws. It just recognizes the laws that are there. But what is interesting is how it was reached. It was reached by the two countries, Germany and Turkey, which had taken the largest number of refugees. And the interesting thing is that the two leaders, Angela Merkel and at that time Turkish Prime Minister Davutoglu, arrived at it independently from two different sides. In the end, it was the Turkish Prime Minister who proposed this to the German Chancellor. And the idea was the following. Instead of having a chaotic, deadly, smuggler-driven crossing in tiny boats with 70 people for a boat of 30 in the Aegean, which would lead people into Greece, which at that time, in early March, had already been blocked off through the policy of those who followed Hungarian Prime Minister Orban, who said, let's just build a wall north of Greece, because we don't want these people in Hungary. Let's build a wall in the Balkans, so everybody who reaches Greece will be stuck there. And at that time, there was only one European leader who criticized this, the German Chancellor. In this environment, Germany and Turkey reached an agreement which had the following ideas. First, the Refugee Convention must be preserved. Anybody who reaches Greece needs to have a fair claim whether they are safe if they're returned to Turkey or not. And that involves, crucially, whether Turkey will offer those to be returned from a Greek island the ability as a safe third country of having an asylum process that is credible and quality in Turkey. If Turkey doesn't offer a fair and quality asylum process to those to be returned from the Greek islands, they cannot be returned. But if they could be returned, the idea would be that people wouldn't get into boats, they wouldn't drown, as 400 people did in the first 3 months of this year, but that then Germany and a coalition of willing EU member states would take refugees, Syrian refugees from Turkey directly as part of an organized resettlement. So the idea, as Chancellor Merkel put it, would be to move from a disorderly and chaotic process to an orderly one, to control borders so that leaders can turn to their publics and say, we actually have a strategy, but not to turn Europe into a fortress, because there would be resettlement, and in the process respect international refugee law. Where are we 6 months later, and why is this a crucial moment? Well, 6 months later, a few things have worked. The idea that you might be returned have led to a dramatic fall in the number of people getting into boats, which has led to a dramatic fall in the number of deaths. I've said in the first 4 months of this year, before the agreement was really in force, the deadliest was, of course, January and February. Almost 400 people drowned, half of them children, according to the UN. In the next 4 months of this year, 10 people drowned in the Aegean. I mean, this is a dramatic decline. But what hasn't worked, and this is what might bring the whole agreement down, are the two central promises that Turkey and Germany and other countries made. One, that anybody that Greece might want to return to Turkey would be assured and guaranteed a fair asylum process in Turkey. Today we have 14,000 people on the Greek islands who crossed in the last 6 months, and Turkey would need to build up the capacity and demonstrate this, that if half of them are non-Syrians, if those non-Syrians are returned to Turkey, they would immediately get the status of asylum seekers and the social rights attached to it, and they would be met by qualified asylum caseworkers with translators and interpreters in a decent and humane reception condition. And then Turkey would assess their claims, as would happen if you send them from Lesbos to Portugal or from Lesbos to Poland. Now this, Turkey would need to do very, very fast. I mean, it's not a legal problem. The law is there. Turkish law is fine. UNHCR's lawyers again told me last week, and they've already written it 6 months ago. The problem is one of resources and focus. But at the same time, the EU needs to deliver on its promises. And that, of course, includes the resettlement from Turkey. Where again, in the last 6 months, for many complicated reasons, but the number one reason is lack of focus, less than 2,000 people have been resettled from Turkey directly to a very small number of states. Of course, Germany and Sweden, again, the top resettlers, although they had already taken most of the refugees last year. France and the Netherlands joined them. So where we are now is in a situation where a lot of European politicians are betting that Turkey and Germany and Europe cannot solve this problem. Turkey will not become a safe third country. Greece will actually have to let people in, and they will be stuck in huge camps around Greece, while Hungary and others will try to build walls in Macedonia. And the Refugee Convention will then no longer apply in substance, and perhaps we just declare that it shouldn't apply in theory either. There will be elections next year in the Netherlands, in France, in Germany, perhaps in Austria, and it's pretty clear that this issue will figure very big in those campaigns. And they already have in election campaigns in the last year, from Poland's Kaczynski to, of course, the rise in popularity again of Viktor Orban, to the great success of Marine Le Pen in local elections in France last year, when a tiny refugee problem in her constituency, Nord-Pas-de-Calais, the 8,000 people in Calais stuck there trying to cross to England, was the number one issue she used in her campaign. So what we need, and I close with this, and this is actually an issue where everybody is involved. What we need to do in the next few weeks is to convince policymakers and to back the policymakers who want to do this, that this is worth doing. That Turkey has everything to gain from ensuring with focus at the highest level of government. It can't be done by the civil servants without this push really from the Prime Minister and his senior ministers to convince the Greek Asylum Service that Turkey is going to be fully safe for those to be returned in the next few months. And Germany and the coalition of countries take seriously their promise of resettling people. And in the mix, the European Union honors the promise it made on visa liberalization, which of course was what Turkey asked for many years after the Balkans and many years after Moldova received visa liberalization in return for helping the European Union. Now, if this fails, The risks are enormous to the EU-Turkey relationship, to those in Europe who've argued that problems can be solved by working with Turkey, to those in Turkey who want to have a non-Islamophobic, non-anti-refugee Europe, to all moderate forces in the European Union in elections next year, and of course, most importantly, to the core principle of the Refugee Convention. But if it works, it might, in a very difficult time of great distrust, set a basis for cooperation. And it would do so not by lowering standards, but by raising them. Not by distrusting each other, but by accepting that this issue can only be solved together. So the reason I came late was because at 2 o'clock I received a phone call from a former EU Prime Minister, and I, having lived in Istanbul for 7 years, foolishly assumed I understood the distances and got into a car from Rumelihisari to meet him in Tünel, because he told me that he would meet a senior Turkish minister at an energy meeting that also takes place today, and that he had read our paper and that he was willing to push this issue. And so I immediately, oh, fantastic. This is a chance to perhaps somehow, because this is how think tanks work, somehow find somebody who might raise the issue. This is, of course, how any of this will happen. And this is where Mercator and the people on this podium, I know Ruprecht Polenz, played a key role in the German debate as one of the people who said to people in the Chancellery, look, work with Turkey. And that, of course, led to the agreement in March. And Mercator, which is the reason my team and ESI has been working on issues of visa liberalization with Turkey for so many years. It can all work, it can all fail, it all depends on us. And I'm looking forward to the debate. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Gerald, for enlightening us on the current state of the EU-Turkey deal and on the prospects of its survival, as you say. Now, I'd like to turn to our final speaker, who is Professor Fuat Keyman. He's the director of the Istanbul Policy Center and professor of international relations at Sabancı University. And as I'm sure as you all know, he's a leading Turkish political scientist, an expert on democratization, globalization, international relations, Turkish foreign policy, and civil society issues. So, Professor Keyman, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you. It's good that I'm talking the last, because my talk involves points that have been mentioned by Mr. Polenz, Nilüfer Göre, and also Gerard. And these are four in the telegraphic form I will actually share with you. But of course, I will actually bring you back to what Nilüfer Göre talked about in terms of the 15th of July coup and then the question of secularism. And it was, of course, coup attempt. And that night probably will be remembered in Turkish political history and modernity, one of the darkest nights of Turkey. I was here, with lots of you, I lived that, and it was actually outrageous, it was shocking, and it was a scary event. And it was not only a coup attempt to take over the state, but of course it was also an attempt to take over Turkey by penetrating into the state, by bombing the parliament, by attempting to kill the president, prime minister, and the other ministers of Turkey, by attacking the Central Intelligence Office, military offices, and all bunch of state buildings. And of course, it was dispersed. Now we actually talk about it as a failed coup attempt. And of course, after the coup attempt, the existing problems between Turkey and the West, including EU, Europe, and United States, has accelerated, increased, and you know, the Turkish people, including myself, was a bit shocked about the slowness of the responses coming from the Europe and the United States, and the frustration and trust problem occurred again. Turkish people were expecting more understanding, more empathy, and more sympathy from the West, and we didn't get it. And of course, people matter in this case, in this kind of circumstances. Emotions matter, and And of course, as Mr. Poland said, right now, after a couple of months after the coup, we are in a situation where the West, including United States, Europe, and the EU, accept that they made a mistake or they were slow in responding to it, and then they were actually slow to showing empathy and sympathy to Turkish people. And also we have reached the point or the place where we need to go beyond the coup, and of course we have to have some sort of we have a sort of emerged consensus right now that it was a coup, and the West was the slow, but nevertheless right now I think we should accept that convergence and move beyond. And in the way in which we move beyond, there is actually a very big, necessity in front of us, because as Nilüfer Göre said, as Mr. Poland said, as Gerard very eloquently explained, we have common challenges, and we have actually very serious, unprecedented common challenges to Turkey, to EU, to Europe, to world, very regional and global challenges. Of course, all of them, and the number one actually is the refugee problem. And of course, Mr. Poland said 2 million, but we have more than 3.2 million Syrian refugees in Turkey. When we actually include the number of refugees in Jordan and Lebanon, this actually number goes beyond 6 million. And with the very, very devastating developments in Aleppo, this actually a number 2.3 million increase in Turkey, then of course Europe. So as Gerard says very, very rightly, we have a very serious refugee crisis, a very serious humanitarian crisis. Of course, when we talk about refugee crisis and reasons, the number one reason is ISIL or Daesh. We have a very serious, actually, the ISIL and Daesh problem, and ISIL or Daesh is more than a terror organization, less than a state, and it's a kind of an organic form which includes both of them, and in a kind of a swing, it actually swings between being a terror organization, attacking Turkey, attacking Europe, Paris, Brussels, the other parts of the Europe. For instance, a guy just picked up in Germany might be actually planning something to explode someplace. So in this sense, on the one hand, a terror organization, but on the other hand, is an organization, Daesh, ISIL, IS, a claim to be a state in Syria and Iraq. Referring to Umberto Eco's book on Foucault's pendulum, it is kind of a pendulum between terror and the state, and if it is strong militaristically, its terrorist activities go down. If it actually is dispersed militaristically, its terror activities go up. Chronologically speaking, we could actually say that. So in this sense, we have also a big problem of Daesh. It's a common challenge to all of us. Of course, when we ask the question why Daesh has become this strong and effective, then we are talking about the failed state problem in Syria, in Iraq, but also all over Middle East and Africa. We have actually the collapse of the Westphalian state model, and which translate itself into this region as the failed state. But of course, like Egypt and others, we have weakened states. So we have a big failed state. We have a big state problem. By failed state, we mean a state which is unable to control what goes on inside, and also unable to control the borders. So in this sense, we have very significant common regional and global challenges. And out of these challenges, the refugee issue and the Daesh issue are mainly Europe-centered issues. especially the refugee issue actually is a Europe-centered issue, and all of the refugees are trying to go to Europe as their final destiny. And even actually when we look at the refugee mobility in Africa, they also want to go to Europe. But when we put this together, these three challenges, refugee, Daesh, and the failed state, then we see that some of the significant and effective actors in these issues, for instance, Russia, for instance, Iran, for instance, Saudi Arabia or the Gulf states, they have nothing to do with the refugee issue. And they don't do anything about the refugee issue. They don't do anything to solve the refugee issue. As a matter of fact, from the international relations perspective, what they do is geopolitical. What they want, geopolitical power, augmentation or increase, and they use the refugee issue and the Daesh issue as a political leverage for their geopolitical game in the region. That's why when we talk about Syria, for instance, when we talk about countries like Somalia, Yemen, we are talking about, on the one hand, places where there are failed states, where there are big human mobility in the form of not migration, refugee. We have to make a big distinction between migration and refugee. What we are talking about is not a migration issue. We are talking about the refugee issue. But of course, all these actually places are proxy games for these guys. Syria is a proxy war. Yemen is a proxy war for these guys who have nothing to do with the refugees, and no refugee wants to go to Russia, no refugee wants to go to Iran or Saudi Arabia. So in this sense, we have to underline the fact that refugee crises are not Europe-centered crisis. Of course, in that context, Daesh, the refugee Daesh and the failed state, Turkey and Europe are the two pivots. When we get into it, Turkey and Germany are the two pivots, because without Turkey, without Germany, it is literally impossible not to solve, but to manage, to deal effectively with the refugee issue. And as a matter of fact, that's why, and most of us actually involved in that too, we have Germany-Turkey bilateral work on the refugee issue, and because one of the main pillars of Germany foreign policy is European integration, we actually have this triangle, Turkey, Germany, and the EU. And in that sense, actually, we have to underline the fact that we have to go beyond the July 15 coup attempt, and we have to actually deal with these common unprecedented regional and global issues. And some of the EU decision makers say it, we have to work together to do this, because neither EU nor Germany nor Turkey itself alone can solve this problem or can deal with this problem. And there is a definite need, there is a definite necessity for these actors to get together and to work on common responses to these unprecedented challenges. So that's why, for instance, my first plea is to energize Turkey-EU relations. As Gerard very rightly put it 2 days ago when we launched the Mercator Istanbul things, in terms of values. Not in terms of technicalities, but in terms of maintaining the main principles of European integration, main principles of Europe, main principles of Turkey-EU relations. We are talking about a necessity coupled with humanitarian issues. We have to bring these together. But of course, we have not forget the fact that Turkey gone through a failed coup attempt, and we have to actually ask the question how Turkey can be functional, how Turkey can act in an effective way in this circumstances. Now actually I have a plea, like Nilüfer, for a new contract in Turkey, new social contract in Turkey. But of course, I did similar kind of talk in the last weekend in the El Sharq Forum, also for the Arab Spring countries. Because Turkish state starting with the AK Party government, Turkish state should learn lessons from the 15th of July coup. It is very, very important to say that we were attacked by these panchists on that night, and all of us got together and resist against it. But of course, at least as important as saying that, we have to also take lessons from that night. Why these guys attacked, why these guys decided to attack the state, to take over Turkey, in what ways they found or they thought that they were able, they could be, in a position to take over the state, to actually rule the country, or to find themselves, or to bring themselves to situation to govern Turkey. Of course, we should not forget the serious problems that Turkey had before the 15th of July. The first problem was polarization. They thought that in a situation like this, extremely polarized society, they could actually do so. The second one actually is the problem of the state, as Nilüfer Göle rightly pointed out. On the one hand, we have a state which is stronger than society, which is actually authoritarian and which can impose all those things on society, individuals. One night we might go to the jail and everything. You cannot do about it. So it's a very strong state. As Metin Eper says, a strong state tradition. But on the other hand, in my own academic writings though, as I suggest, it's a very weak state. A state that can be penetrated into, that can be taken over. That is what the Gülen movement did. They penetrated in the state, in the army, in the security, in the judiciary, and they actually took that state. So in this sense, we have a state problem. On the one hand, strong vis-a-vis their society and individuals. On the other hand, very weak to be penetrated into and to be taken over. So in this sense, we have to solve this actual state problem. And AK Party government did not, we know right now that, objectively speaking, we could say that, out of 14 years, they were not able and they did not solve this state problem. And as a matter of fact, after all these years dominant party politics, all these years majoritarian democracy, 15th of July demonstrated that we have a very state dilemma in front of us. And thirdly, as Nilüfer Göle said, the post-secular idea of Turkey failed that night. It was actually, as a matter of fact, coup attempt between two groups who come from the Islamic circles, who actually won the elections, and who did actually who were very effective in the last 10, 15 years of Turkey. We might go back to 80s, but last 15 years actually with the transformation of Turkey in the AK Party rule, they've been so effective. And then, including myself, I have actually writings on secularism. I refer to post-secular agenda in Turkey, passive secularism, assertive secularism. I think that kind of idea failed that night. Because, as a matter of fact, when Islamic groups or any group in Turkey, when they actually face the state dilemma, they could easily go for taking over the state rather than actually functioning as a civil society organization, as a philanthropic organization, or as a political party. So in this sense, if you have actually a big state problem, if you have a big problem of polarization, if you have actually also the failed social contract on the basis of post-secularism, one person or one group might actually find this possibility for itself to take over the state. Of course, that is coupled with the extreme negative image of Turkey in Europe and in the West. There's a huge disconnect between Turkey and the West, and as a matter of fact, even people like us having big difficulty to talk about Turkey in the West. So in this sense, all of these four actually are the also items that we need, especially, the government should take a lesson. And on the basis of four, I will actually plea this new social contract based on four principles. Maybe I might little differ from Nilüfer, but I might also agree with this beyond the inclusive secularism. I think We learned from the coup attempt that the state should be secular. If we are going to solve the state dilemma in Turkey, we have to strengthen the state, and the way in which we could strengthen the state is to start with secularism. In the minimum level, the state should be secular. In terms of the principles of impartiality and universality, but at the same time in terms of the principle of merit. Like sort of getting the positions in the state, all the state exams and everything. So in this sense, the state should be secular. But politics should be plural. Politics should include all the parties coming from religiosity, ethnicity, wherever. So in this sense, I might actually kind of endorse Marx Weberian split between state and politics and suggest that the state should be secular, but politics should be actually plural. Of course, the more plural politics is, the less majoritarian, less populist democracy becomes. And the politics should be the main area to solve the problems through deliberation. But of course, how can we actually maintain this secular state and plural politics? Of course, through inclusive institutions. Through inclusive institutions in politics, in economy, in civil society. We have to promote inclusive institutions. If institutions are seen as areas that can be taken over by certain organizations, certain groups, to establish their hegemony and dominance over the state and society, then of course we are not talking about inclusive institutions. As a matter of fact, one of the failures of the AK Party government last 14 years, maybe not the first 5, 6 years, but after that is to push exclusive institutions rather than inclusive institutions. Institutions for my governance, institutions for my hegemony, institutions for my domination. As Daran Acemoğlu suggests in his book, Why the State Fails, I think inclusive institutions is key to push this secular state and plural politics in a democratic form. And then finally, equal citizenship. I think we have to actually think about our identity problems. This is where the post-secularism failed, because post-secular agenda did not include any reference to equal citizenship in terms of rights, in terms of freedoms, and in terms of responsibilities. I think we should actually push for some sort of social contract based on citizenship rather than identity. We should not forget about identity. We should have open spaces for identity, but identity claims should be debated, deliberated, and solved within the area of citizenship. So secular state, plural politics, inclusive institutions, and equal citizenship might be actually open a space for a new kind of Turkey that will actually deal with the problems. If Turkey does this alone? I don't think so. Actually, here lies in the significance of Turkey-EU relations. And because these relations, more than itself, with reference to chapters, with reference to Copenhagen political criteria, with reference to, for instance, right now we are talking about chapters 20 to 24, with reference to visa liberalization, with reference to what actually is the main hurdle to visa liberalization right now, which is the idea of terror, and with reference to refugees and how to deal with refugees in terms of values and standards, I think is very, very important. It's a big anchor to keep Turkey on the right track. Europe might have big problems, EU might have big problems, Turkey might have big problems, but Turkey-EU relations is a significant anchor to keep Turkish democracy on the right track, to constitute the basis for the new social contract, should be actually supported and endorsed for all of us, and I will stop here.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much.